Good afternoon and welcome to everyone who's here. Uh, Before we get into the formal agenda, I would really appreciate if our two uh, point persons, both Mr. Paul and Mr. McGinnis, would open us up with a brief welcome and afford us an opportunity to go around the room and have everyone introduce themselves. You can hear from both Rory and Ken, that'd be great.
Rory McGinnis in the Mayor's Office of the City of Columbus. My title is Special Assistant, and happy to be working with all of you on this. And just want to assure you that there's anything that you need at all from the administration, happy to provide it. Any city department is happy to help you in this process. You're going to hear from people today in our Human Resources Department who are going to be helping us for a majority of the work that we have here, but also our Civil Service Commission is here today. Ken, if you want to talk about who's here from council and other offices?
Sure, and thank you for being here. This is historic. This is the first ever Citizens Commission on Elected Official Compensation. It's a mouthful. It's an important responsibility, and I really appreciate each of you stepping up and answering the call and helping us with this task. From the city clerk's office, just to reassure you, we'll have a good record of this. Angie Blevins and Cheryl Austin. They'll be keeping track of our conversations and producing the minutes of these meetings. That'll be public record, and we'll have those to chart our progress as we move through the process. I'm Ken Paul. Most of you know me. I'm the Chief of Staff to Andy Ginther, and I've had the pleasure of working with most of you before. So thanks for being here. Tom Diamond on our staff, I think, is in the audience, but he's lending staff support from the Legislative Research Office also. And our hope is that when you leave here today, you feel assured that you've got a team of folks working to give you the information that you need to make good decisions. And thanks again for being here.
It's outstanding. Thank you very much. Let's begin with brief introductions for all of the commission members, and if I'm so privileged, I'll begin with myself. I don't think I'm a stranger to folks in the room. I'm Chet Christie, and I've had the distinction and the privilege of serving as the Director of Human Resources for the City of Columbus for almost 15 years, from February of 2000 until November 30th of last year, and also had the distinction of being retired now. So they told me until we got the phone call. In addition to the human resources responsibility, but I've had about a little over 30 years of responsibility both in human resources management and also in the field of labor and employment law. Had experience both at the labor side of things as a representative for a public sector labor union, and on the management side of things was the Director of Human Resources with the Department of Youth Services with the state of Ohio, and also served as an administrative law judge for about an 8-year period with the State Employment Relations Board. So if it's related to human resources, employment, or anything related to those, then it's something that I've been involved with. Happy to have been married for a little over 32 years, I have 2 adult daughters, and looking forward to all the enjoyments of retirement. Great. Commissioner Tyler Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. My name is Dawn Tyler Lee. My full-time work is at United Way of Central Ohio, where I serve as the Senior Vice President of Community Impact. My second job is as Board Chair of CODA, and I'm pleased to be here today as part of this commission. I served on the Charter Review Commission last year, and I think I was invited back either because I did a good job or because I didn't do a good job and you're giving me another chance. So you don't have to let me know which one is the correct one, but honored to be here in this capacity to serve. Was formerly a legislative aide for Columbus City Council for former council member Charlita Tavares in the late 90s, and also served as a lobbyist for the university, and so very familiar with City Hall and always glad to be among my City of Columbus colleagues. So thank you for the invitation to serve and look forward to working with everyone again.
Thank you. Commissioner Member Easterday.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Kristen Easterday. My day job is I serve as the Director of Local Government Relations at the Columbus Chamber of Commerce. So We represent businesses here in Central Ohio. Another hat that I also wear is that I'm currently president to the Harrison West Society, a neighborhood within the Short North area. So I'm happy to be here, and thanks for the invitation.
Thank you. Commissioner Murdoch?
Thanks for having us. I'm William Murdoch. I'm the Executive Director of the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission, or MORPC. MORPC is an association of 60 local governments and regional organizations, including the City of Columbus. So my day job involves working with elected officials all throughout Central Ohio, and we're hoping to bring that perspective to the Commission. I'm also a longtime City of Columbus resident of the University District. I was a University Area Commissioner for a short time, and I've worked in the local arena with local government in Gahanna. I was a state official. I ran the Community Services Division at the Department of Development, and I'm now at the regional level, so I've kind of touched all 3 levels of government here in Central Ohio. So happy to be a part.
Outstanding, thank you. And Commissioner Member Moore.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Marshall Moore. I'm the Vice President of Legal and Government Affairs and General Counsel for the Central Ohio Transit Authority. I served as co-chair on the Charter Review Commission, and this recommendation was birthed from that commission, so I'm honored to be back to see that through. Prior to being General Counsel, I served 2 years as Vice President of Human Resources, so this is a bit in my wheelhouse. So I'm happy to be here and hope that my experience is useful, but honored to serve, so thank you for the invitation.
Outstanding, thank you all. And I know we have other representatives from both the City Attorney's Office with Chief Counsel Josh Cox present. Anything you'd like to share with us, Josh?
No, my goal is to be a part of the plans of this.
And we sincerely hope that you can fulfill that capacity. Yes, thank you. Outstanding. And representatives from the Department of Human Resources, our Compensation Manager, Greg Deverson, and our Deputy Director, Jacola Bass. Anything from either of you?
Just to mention that it's an honor to be a part of this, and I'm here to function as your resource. Whatever data, research, or information that you would need, that's what I would like to provide for you.
Outstanding. Thank you for that. Deputy Director Bass.
I'm here representing Director Nicole Brandon. I served as Deputy Director of Human Resources now for 10 years. And the other hat that I wear, I'm a mother of 2 wonderful children. And I'm just glad to be here and serve with the city.
Outstanding. Thank you very much. Just before we go further, I do want to share, and I believe I speak on behalf of all of the commission members. We want to thank both Rory and Ken, as well as the departments that are represented here, for all of the logistics support and certainly all of the work that has been done already. I'm sure that will enable us to have a very efficient, I'm sure very informative, and most importantly very productive first meeting. This is a significant responsibility, and we thank both Mayor Coleman, Council President Ginther, and the other members of Council for the opportunity that they have afforded all of us. Just as importantly, we thank them for the faith that they have in our ability essentially to act as the voice of the citizens of this great city and to take on this extraordinary responsibility. It's a bit of a challenge as well in that we're balancing both what's fair and equitable with the awesome responsibility of ensuring that we are good stewards of the resources that are provided by our taxpayers. But I'm certain that with your assistance and support, that we're up to the challenge. I'm privileged to serve with this tremendous board, this commission, I should say, very able and distinguished panel of commissioners, and look forward to working with everyone. Thank you. We'll turn things back over to Mr. Paul and Mr. McGinnis.
Do you want to do section 2 real quick?
Sure.
And then I'll hop up back to
Gotcha, no problem.
officially bestow chairmanship.
So our second item on the agenda is the selection of the commission chairperson. Section 15.2 of the charter says that the Citizens Commission on Elected Official Compensation shall consist of 5 members. 2 members shall be appointed by the council, 2 members appointed by the mayor, and then 1 member shall be jointly appointed by council and the mayor, such member serving as the chair of the commission. Director Christie was jointly appointed by the mayor and city council and will serve as the commission chair. And we thank Director Christie for leading us in our efforts here.
Thanks. And I'd point out, obviously we know we're here in the room and there are cameras surrounding us, but this is being recorded so that it'll be broadcast for the citizens on CTV3, probably multiple times, and available streaming on the City of Columbus's website. So some of the discussion may be bringing out points that we may know ourselves, but there is a certain benefit of going through some of these things just for the benefit of the public. These meetings are public. They're public noticed. They'll be well publicized throughout, and we'll get a little bit later into the meeting discussing the various different aspects of how we're getting the information out and getting input back from the community. The good news is we had a little practice with this through the Charter Review Commission, and we'll be using a similar process to communicate with the public in this setting. Before you, you have a lot of papers and a large binder. I'm going to walk you through very quickly just the different things that are in your binder, and then as we work our way through the agenda, we'll actually go through the various different pieces in more detail. The agenda minutes presentations is pretty self-explanatory. That's just a spot to stick those things. But in the research section, you're going to find, and I will point out you actually have two versions of some of these things because there are lots of numbers on some of the sheets that have been provided for you. A smaller version is in your binder for ease of transport, but there are larger versions of some of that material also, just so it's a little bit easier to see when we get to those. But there's a compensation schedule that will be important as we talk about the scope of the commission, a history of elected official compensation looking backward for the past 10 years. Greg Beaverson put that together, and a listing of peer cities, which we'll get into again a little bit later on, but it's a starting point for comparison and looking at other cities around the country, the region. Also in the binder is some background information on the Charter Review Commission recommendation. Ms. Moore referenced the fact that this was birthed out of the Charter Review Commission. She can speak to that. We will all speak to it here shortly. But the actual language, the supporting documentation and recommendation that backed up the recommendation from the Charter Review Commission is in the binder. Also, the ordinance that council passed, actually implementing the recommendation, and then the ballot language. This came about through a ballot initiative charter amendments that were before Columbus voters last November, which passed overwhelmingly, was issue number 8. So that the language there is also included in your binders. Also is the relevant charter section. It's 15 through 15.5, which outlines the role of the charter, which I'll speak to here in a little bit. And finally, at the back, and we'll probably add to this as we go through the process and as we come across information we think is helpful. It's a couple of different reports from other communities around the country. I believe it's Mesa and Phoenix are the two that we included for you today. It's important to point out we didn't include them because we want you to read them and make any judgments or to lead you down any one particular path, but to simply see the types of conversations other communities have had around this issue. In doing some initial research, we found that it's actually fairly common in a lot of different cities of varying sizes with different government makeups. These are two reports that I think coming into this new, none of us have ever done it before. We're doing our best to work through it. It might be good to take some time to just read through it and see the types of questions and things that were considered in other communities, so that as we move our way through the process, you can help frame the information that's going to be presented to you. And I think that's it. with your binders, again, you've got duplicate copies of some of those, just the larger versions under there. And there is one handout that wasn't in your binder. I believe there's a calendar. We'll get to that at the end of the meeting when we're trying to set our calendars and figure out a meeting schedule. But we all use our phones and computers anymore to keep our calendars, but sometimes it's nice just to have a paper calendar in front of you to try and figure out how things are going to go and what the timeline's going to look at.
Appreciate that, sir. Thank you. I think that in order for us to have some context and somewhat of a foundation for what it is that we're going to undertake here, it would be very, very helpful for Ken, and I believe it would be tremendous to get some additional feedback and input from both Commission members Moore and Tyler Lee with regard to the activities of the Charter Review Commission and how essentially the work done last year as part of the commission may have served as a springboard or has led to the commission, the establishment of this commission. That way it gives us some context and some background.
Sure. I actually had to look it up this morning when this all started, but it was April 2nd of last year when Mayor Coleman and Council President Ginther announced the formation of the Charter Review Commission, co-chaired by Ms. Moore. The other co-chair, Mike Curtin, State Rep Mike Curtin, and a distinguished group of folks, including Auditor Dorian, who served. They worked through, and I looked at the timeline again, July is when we had our final meeting. Involved a number of public meetings, public hearings where public testimony was accepted, dedicated website, various different forums, community meetings, fact sheets, all the works. Ultimately, they ended up recommending to council and the mayor 19 recommendations, which were considered by council and ultimately via ordinance passed and placed on the November ballot last year. They took the form, those 19 recommendations, grouped in categories of issues 6, 7, and 8. And the issue that gave way to this discussion and the formation of the Citizens Commission on Elected Official Compensation was issue 8. All 3 issues passed overwhelmingly. None had less than 70% approval from the voters. So we can move forward with confidence in the good work that the Charter Review Commission did, but in the foundation for this conversation here. I think that's, from my perspective, sort of the way that we got here. In just a moment, I'll get more into the actual recommendation from the commission and sort of outline the charge for the commission. But would love to give you the opportunity to weigh in and give any thoughts from your experience on the Charter Review Commission.
I would only add that as we looked at this issue, it was clear that this was an emerging best practice, and it was something that we wanted to implement. There was a lot of dialogue around it. It was very awkward that the officials were setting their salary. That's just a very difficult position for them to be in, and this was an emerging best practice, and we decided to implement it.
I'll just echo the opening comments that Chair Christie made. We have in our city, we're very fortunate to have very hardworking elected officials, but we also recognize the need to be good stewards over taxpayer dollars. And so having this commission, we saw as members of the Charter Review Commission, was that opportunity to balance compensation for elected officials who are hardworking here in our city while also being faithful over taxpayer dollars. And so that is how the conversation went, and pleased to see this recommendation move forward so quickly.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's very helpful. Ken, you indicated you want to provide just a little bit more structure, a little more background on
Sure.
purpose, etc.
And it's their first opportunity to turn to a tab in a binder. If you go to the background section, it's probably best, just for the purpose of the conversation, I'll just read this, and it'll be the last thing I think I read for this meeting. But this is the recommendation of the Charter Review Commission that gave way to this conversation, this meeting today. The Charter Review Commission recommends a charter amendment creating a Citizens Commission on elected official compensation with salaries established by ordinance of council based on the recommendation of such commission. Throughout the country, citizens have grappled with two competing goals: removing a perception of politics and setting elected official compensation, and maintaining accountability to voters once the salaries are set. For this reason, a majority of the nation's 30 largest cities, plus Ohio's largest cities, institute salaries by a method other than a discretionary ordinance of council. Reliance on a citizens commission has emerged as a leading common practice in those cities. The commission finds that the city would be well served by shifting from the discretionary ordinance approach and embracing a citizens commission to study and recommend salaries, convening a commission every 4 years, and limiting raises to a cost of living adjustment, and requiring council approval based on, but not to exceed, those recommendations. So that frames the thought and the impetus behind the formation of this commission. And then if you flip to the section titled Charter, you'll actually see two select pages, 15.1 through 15.5 of the Columbus City Charter as amended by voters, which outlines the specific charge of the commission. I'm not going to read this in entirety, but I'll call your attention to a few key points. First of all, while Rory and I represent the Mayor Coleman's administration and Columbus City Council, there in the first sentence, it draws the distinction that this commission is in charge of looking at salaries and compensation for all elected officials in Columbus. It includes council members, the auditor, the city attorney, the mayor, and council. It should be pointed out, and we're going to get in a moment to a very complex yet colorful spreadsheet that speaks to the timing and sort of the framework that you'll be making your decision in. It's somewhat complicated because there's a provision in the charter which is well thought out, and it's been there since the inception of the charter, that elected officials cannot adjust their pay mid-term. Since council will still have to pass an ordinance adopting in some form or another the recommendations you put forward, and ultimately that would presumably impact the compensation. The timing of the terms has to be taken into consideration, and we'll get to that. And one of the underlying goals, though not explicitly stated, is to ultimately get to a place where when these commissions, as you heard me just say a few minutes ago, as they form every 4 years, that they're able to set the compensation for all the elected officials at one time through one commission for a set period of time. And we'll get to that here in a moment. The first commission, well, it's one of these, it'll start here except for the first Citizens Commission on elected official compensation was to take place in 2008, except for the first one shall take place in 2015. That's today. Congratulations. The reason, again, for the meeting in 2015, and certainly, Ms. Moore, Ms. Lee, you can chime in if you'd like. The reasons were twofold. One, it's the timing issue. In order to be able to set pay into the future, we needed to meet now to be able to get into a cadence and a timing where we could set those salaries outside of the terms of existing office holders. And additionally, we would have acted on, or voters would have approved this provision, and to have waited until 2018 to act upon it, just the feeling, I think, was not in the best interest of the citizens. We thought this was a good idea, so why wait until 2018? So that's how we find ourselves here today, but thereafter it'll be 2018 and every 4 years beyond. Commission duties, you'll review the salaries of like positions in the public sector. That's probably an important point to point out, because all of you have a vast amount of HR experience and have dealt with these types of issues before. You can look at the private and public sectors, not-for-profits, salary scales and ranges are impacted by a lot of different factors. We're going to try and keep our focus on the public sector here because the charter tells us to. That said, we may at some point in time, it may be beneficial to enter other information into the record for consideration. And recommending those salaries, and this gets to Ms. Lee's point, recommending salaries appropriate to the duties and responsibilities of each elected officer of the city. So there'll be some discussion of what exactly do the office holders do, what are their daily duties, and just trying to wrap your head around the day in the life of any of these elected officials and be able to compare that, because it's very different in many cities around the country, and cities of different sizes and depending on how they're organized and structured. And then within 3 months of meeting, you'll put forth some recommendations and draft a report, submit it to our fine clerk down at the end of the table there. She's looking forward to it, I'm sure. It'll be a good read. Rest assured, you will not be responsible for drafting that actual report. How we envision this going is us as staff will bring you information. You'll ask us for more information. You'll discuss it, debate it, probably ask for some more information, and ultimately get to a point where you're comfortable making a recommendation. And then it'll be up to us to put all of that into a tight report that can articulate how you arrived at that recommendation. And I suppose the last point to mention, and I already have once, but I'll reiterate it because it takes a little pressure off of you, is that no matter what the recommendation is, ultimately the elected officials that you are recommending salaries for, it's a sensitive topic, ultimately they will have to vote on the recommendation to implement them. Your recommendations will not go into effect automatically, immediately. And ultimately, as elected officials, they're responsible for all decisions that they make and all votes that they cast, and this is no exception. So you have that sort of in the back of your mind. I think Greg's going to talk a little bit later when we get down into the nitty-gritty, but a couple other points too to point out. When you're setting the salary for folks, you're going to be setting it for a specific year, and then the charter refers to annual adjustments based on cost of living, or more specifically the CPI, or Consumer Price Index. I am not a math guy. I looked up the Consumer Price Index today. It confused me a bit. So I'm not going to go into that in any greater detail, but leave that to Greg and for conversation at a later meeting. But that would be good to know as we get into the conversation also, that it's not setting a specific salary for multiple years. It's really setting a base, knowing that any increase there forward would be capped at that Consumer Price Index, and knowing that that would be revisited 4 years down the line by another commission. Maybe this one, maybe a new commission, depending on where we're at 4 years from now. But I think that, if I missed anything, Lori?
I don't think so.
Hopefully that gives you a good framework of sort of the charge of the commission.
Other than,
I guess I
yeah.
guess I'll just go ahead and go through that. If you'd pull out your very colorful spreadsheet. I have a daughter who's in pre-K, and so this is inspired by her. Actually, I'm not a math guy, and I put this together trying to make sense of and figure out how to represent for all of you the challenge of staggered terms and the different offices and pay rates that have already been established via council ordinance, and give you some parameters over what you can and can't do and what you're sort of being asked to look at in terms of the actual years that are up for discussion. So I tried to make a simple analogy to a traffic light, in that green means go, yellow means slow, and red means no or stop, right? Or yellow may mean speed up, but we will say slow in the case of this, or either that, hit the pause button and consider, and I'll go into that more. we'll start with the red because that's the simplest to explain. The red reflects the salaries that have already been set by council ordinance that impact years that are in the current terms of those elected office holders. So the point being that even if you were to want to make a recommendation about it, council could not implement that recommendation because they are prohibited by the charter from changing their salary in the middle of the term. The yellow is where it's more interesting and slightly more complicated, and I'll try and explain it as best I can. But the end result will be is you could consider adjusting the pay scale, and you might determine that it's in the best interest of the city to do so. But we'll leave that decision for a later date. But essentially what this means are, these are for the mayor, for the council president, or at least the current council president, and 3 other members of council, or probably more appropriately put, for 4 members of council or council seats who the next term will start on January 1st, 2016, the same as the first date of the next mayor. Their terms have not yet begun, and you would have the option to make a recommendation to adjust those salaries, and then the cost of living increases thereon. You can see there in the yellow that there are already salaries established. What you would effectively be doing if you decided to consider that is determining whether or not those rates were too high, too low, just right, or they need to be increased, whatnot. And then the out years would be pegged to that cost of living increase. There's some interesting scenarios that could come about if we went that direction, but you can do that. The green, well, before I leave the yellow, one other point to note. For council, this becomes slightly more complicated if we pursue that route. It means that you would have a situation where some council members are getting paid more than others, presumably. That could be a challenge. It's a challenge that you could work through over time and address. And there's some ways to get at that, but there is no way of getting around for at least 2 years under that scenario that 4 out of the 7 council members would be paid at a different rate than 3 members of council. So just put that in the back of your mind. The green is where it starts to get more simple. The commission could choose to simply leave those yellow boxes in place and focus those that are in green, which are the years 2018, or the year 2018, and the successive 3 years thereafter, 19, 20, and 21. Essentially, it would actually set out a process where you could set that base and have that cost of living increase, and that would run right up to the next Charter Review Commission in 2018. It does not necessarily take off the table the discussion about addressing the current pay rate or the pay rate set for the mayor, which goes through 2019. The rate is already set for 18 and 19. But the commission is within its charge to look at that 2018 rate and make any adjustment or leave it the same. And then 19, 20, and 21 could there follow after at that cost of living increase. That's a lot to digest. And I can tell you that pretty much after that autumn squash color there in 2022 and on, you don't necessarily need to be concerned with it, but I included it to try and illustrate the fact that whichever of those approaches you take on the front end, we will get to a point, either in 18 or in 22, where we will be setting the pay for all elected officials at the same time through the same commission. Marcel and Don, I don't know if you recall, but when we were learning about the charter, when we went through the Charter Review Commission, there were provisions in our very first charter that when you were getting started were a bit awkward and were a bit off because you needed to be able to start somewhere, so to speak. So this is the somewhere where we're starting today. Hopefully that between the key below, my explanation, it makes some sense. And if not, certainly we can follow up with it and come back to it at a later date if we need clarification. I simply say that because these dates, these time frames, and the explanation of the charge before should hopefully give you a good idea of the charge and context of what we're discussing.
Just for the record and
Sure.
for clarification, I'm interested in the particular charter provision that authorizes the commission to change any of the salaries that already exist in 16, 17, 18, and 19. The yellow portion that you described earlier.
I may have to defer to my attorney, the city attorney, but we did discuss this in advance. It is, I don't know that it's not expressly stated in the charter that you could change a previously set salary. However, the charge is to set the salary, regardless of whatever the salary might be currently. We did contemplate, however, that if the existing salaries did change, it gets back to the council action required. We believe that we would then, if there was a change in any existing rate, the council would have to repeal a previous ordinance passed and then pass via ordinance the new rate. They would have to pass an ordinance with that new rate regardless, but it would be essentially a repeal and replace situation. Josh nods his head yes, and that's good.
Very good, thank you. All right. In order for us to establish a baseline, it seems appropriate that we would review compensation as it's currently set. Mr. Beaverson, I believe you're prepared to take us down that road.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman Christie. If Commissioners, if you could turn to the research tab of your binder. It's a smaller version of it here. I'm not sure if everyone, oh, you do. You have the 8.5 by 14 page. What we tried to put together here for you is largely what you saw in the information, the colorful chart that Ken presented, but we also wanted to go back to, we chose 2005, just to give everyone an idea of what the salaries were back then and how they've progressed and at what percentage change that's happened every year. So on the top, and if anyone would like me to go down and specifically just state for the record or however you'd like me to do it, what the salaries are for the current year, I'm happy to do that. But you can see where that runs from 2005 through 2017. And I just wanted to just make that explanation that the title of each chart goes through 2017. I set it up so it went through 2019 on the actual table because, of course, that had to account for the mayor's salary that goes out to that point. Below, you can see the percentage increases.
I think it would be helpful for those who will be watching later to just say what the current salaries are for
I'd be
those who
happy
might
to
not
do that.
have the handout.
Okay. Something that you should understand up front is all of the salaries exist as amendments to a management compensation plan ordinance that is for which the Department of Human Resources is responsible. We are the ones who recommend and actually write the legislation to have City Council vote and amend that ordinance. So for all of the management compensation plan employees in the city, this is an employee group of non-union represented employees. All of the elected officials are included in that, just for clarification up front. For 2015, we'll start at the top with the mayor. The mayor's salary is $172,981. The city attorney is $168,126. Obviously, these are annual figures. City auditor is the same amount, $168,126. Council president, $63,259. And a council member, $52,585. And I did just forget to mention The reason I brought that up about the management compensation plan is because each of these are written in the legislation that they become effective January 1st of the next year. So all of these that you see were effective of January 1st of that year. Let's see. Just a short note about benefits. In terms of benefits, the elected officials, again, in the management compensation plan, are eligible for and receive the same benefits that all employees in that employee group do. So health, life insurance, health includes vision and dental, and I don't think I'm leaving anything out there. There are some exclusions that if it's desired by the commission that we can go over later, where it actually excludes elected officials and department directors in some cases for getting certain, I guess what we refer to as fringe benefits that other employees do. But that's because of their status as elected or officials or directors.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Peterson? At least with regard to the existing salaries.
For the benefit of the group also, I should point out, I was going to get to this a little bit later, but there will be a website established. It's actually already established. It's just not live because we were waiting for this meeting to be able to populate it with some content. But all of your documents that you have in front of us will be on that website. So certainly these spreadsheets, these numbers will be available for the public view afterwards. It is still good to read into the record, so certainly don't want to discourage that, but we'll also be making it available online.
It's fairly evident, just based on the discussion that we've had over the last few minutes, that there are a myriad of questions that we're going to need to ultimately address and resolve as part of our recommendations. It seems to me that for purposes of this meeting, there are at least two fundamental ones that we can hopefully are prepared to move forward with addressing today. One being determining exactly which of the cities that have been deemed comparable we'd be prepared to review and use as our baseline for some of the recommendations, and then to determine to what extent there are additional cities beyond those that you're prepared to recommend, or frankly, to what extent there are some that you're recommending that, from the Commission's perspective, may not be appropriate cities for review. But I believe that's something that we should be addressing today. And frankly, it's a good opportunity, I think, to determine what else beyond just what truly are the comparable cities. What are the other things that we want to begin to review and compare? So again, I'll turn to Greg to kind of lead us in that discussion.
Okay. If you could turn to, and again, I think everyone does have the it would be entitled Columbus Peer and Charter Commission Cities. I think there's one in your binder, but you may have a larger copy. If not, the one in the binder will certainly suffice. This is always an interesting question. To whom do we want to compare ourselves? For what set of reasons, whether it be geography, whether it be population, whether it be demographics, and a myriad of other reasons, why would we make a selection of certain cities over others to go and obtain salary data and compare what our current employees are making against that? We have to determine the market somewhere. And as Chairman Christie was saying, it's something that needs to be decided up front. Obviously, it's a key component to researching it properly and creating a good foundation that we can do our research on. The title of it is Columbus Peer and Charter Commission Cities. Originally, I actually keep this list as peer cities to Columbus. I expanded it to include the cities that the Charter Commission included that were not included in what I'll call the City of Columbus peer city list. So I think it grew by maybe 9 cities, and they're most of them were quite large. You can see there where there's one asterisk beside it. Oh, excuse me. Oh no, where there's one asterisk, it's considered a peer city, but it was actually excluded from the Charter Commission list of cities. So, Chairman Christie, when you were describing those categories, we've got all of those categories here. There are cities that we normally include when we do research. There are cities that the Commission included, and then there are the third category would be cities that we normally include that were not on the Commission's list. So if that's clear as mud to everyone.
Exactly.
Yes, right, I know. Just to start talking about what we try to look for, first of all, is cities within the state. That makes the most sense. Within our region, what are other cities in the state of Ohio paying the same job we want to match? And normally when I say job, I'm talking about jobs we have in our class plan here in the city, one of 650 plus jobs. But of course here we're here to look at elected officials. So in one sense it works the same, in another sense it's a little different. Elected officials in general don't generally have job descriptions. There isn't a classification specification for most other cities where there is such a thing. So that's one consideration. Another one is what about cities that are really similar to us in terms of population, in terms of metropolitan area population, and then other things. I don't know if it's here. I don't think it's in your binder, but I'll just give you an example. There's a difference that I make between a peer city and a core peer city. And the reason for that is because in many ways they're similar to us. Let me just read you very quickly a list of when someone asks me to get salary data for a particular job or a group of jobs. These are often the cities or metro areas we go out and ask for a variety of reasons. Austin, Texas, and as I read these, you can follow along and see at least the population and MSA similarity between Columbus and these cities. Austin, Texas, Baltimore, Maryland. Baltimore is something we call a unigov. It's actually a combined government of city and county. Charlotte, or Charlotte-Mecklenburg, North Carolina. Denver, Detroit, Indianapolis, and Louisville. Indianapolis is also a unigov in Indianapolis, Marion County, and Louisville, Jefferson County, and actually Denver is one too. In Ohio, it's Akron, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Dayton, Toledo, and then I noticed that the commission added Youngstown to that. And please, Chairman Christie, if I'm talking too much, please stop me. One of the things that we look at with those core peer cities, I'll give you an example. Austin is a state capital. Austin is a big college town. Austin has very similar demographics to Columbus, and there are a variety of similarities. So when we start narrowing this list, and I'm back to the bigger list now, when we start narrowing this down, those are things that you may want to take into consideration for us to then go and do this research on. It just depends on how far and how deep we want to go.
Before you go further, just for clarification, you referenced both a peer city and something that you referred to as a core peer city. If I'm jumping the gun here, let me know. But I'd be very interested in understanding the distinction you're making between the two.
Well, the peer city would be a more general level, a broader level. Those cities, and they're on the larger list, those cities largely come from lists that have been compiled in the past on our union negotiation teams. So when the union, when the city is negotiating with unions, we go out and do the same kind of thing that we're going to do here, but for a select group of what we call benchmark jobs. The union and management agree to a certain number of cities. Well, over the years in past negotiations, this is a list of cities. So at some point, they have been considered a peer city for one reason or another.
And the core peer city?
The core peer cities, we worked with our chief negotiators to decide that when we want to go out on a consistent basis, not necessarily union negotiations, but to find the market for a group of jobs, what are really the closest to us that everyone could agree upon and come to some kind of consensus about? And those are what the core peer cities are. So, and again, if you look at those in terms of population alone, they're quite similar to Columbus in comparison to many of the peer cities. I hope that helps.
Mm-hmm.
You cleared up that muddy water quite
Yeah,
well.
okay, good.
Thank
Right.
you.
Thank you.
And so really, it's up to the commission as to decide. We can gather data on all of these different cities. I know the charter specifically spells out different cities. It might be helpful because the charter specifically asks for those, that we benchmark those. It could be this whole list. It could be less cities on this list. And we just need the commission's direction as to we don't have to, we could, get a wide scope of what's here, and at a later date, the commission can decide, we only want to look at these certain cities. So it's really kind of a decision for the commission.
I guess in order to assist us with that decision, we would need a few other things. How practical is it from the standpoint of getting the information, getting it timely, accuracy, and just from your experience in having done this, what makes the most sense from your perspective?
Well, excuse me, that's actually an easy one to answer. Just like anything else, the more information we ask for, the more detailed the answers need to be, the more time it's going to take. As someone on the receiving end, municipalities, this is very common for municipalities to call, email, do short salary surveys, back and forth. What do you pay? They put all that together. That's how they form the market. There's a whole salary survey industry that exists, even to which we subscribe, that provides that information. But of course, when we get into the questions part, what questions are we going to ask? How many cities are we going to ask? We're asking them to do us a favor. And we can only get so much of this information from internet sites, from municipality websites and things like that. So we are relying on human resource departments, civil service commissions, personnel departments, basically our counterparts in these other cities, to provide us with this information. It's not anything they have to do. It's something that they understand because they know that in the past or in someday, in the future, that the shoe's going to be on the other foot and they'll be asking us. Now, that being said, over the years, I like to think I've established some good relationships, some very good relationships with definitely the core peer cities, but with several of the cities. I know my counterpart there. They know me. We have an annual convention that we go to for people who do compensation, and I've met other folks there before. So all of that being said, there is an avenue to just sometimes pick up the phone and ask, hey, where's that data?
In the interest of peering down this list to some degree, are there any obvious exclusions or ones that you would initially recommend that we not pursue? A New York City, San Diego, California, et cetera, based, if nothing else, based on population, et cetera. I don't know that they would be considered peer cities, but you all are the experts. You tell us.
I would agree with you, Chairman Christie. There are a number of cities that certainly I'd be happy to go through and provide the commission with a modified or amended list to be able to do that. The cities that you mentioned, some of those are just, you know, really, really large, and then when you start looking at the MSA, while those elected officials may not serve all of those constituents in that MSA, that does figure into salary data that we would obtain, certainly. So I would be happy to pare that down and make a recommendation.
Thoughts by commissioners, please.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. One question would be, there is a list of about 16 cities that Columbus 2020 and the Columbus Chamber often look at as competitive peer cities. Are those cities all included? It looks like a number of them are, just from my knowledge, but are they all included in this list?
Yes, ma'am. My guess would be that they would be. I'm not familiar with the list, but I could certainly cross-check them and get the list and then cross-check them. But my guess is that most likely all of them are. Yeah, and it makes sense. Whenever any organization would go out and try to compare themselves with other cities, it's logical to do what we've done, which is, you know, just ask yourself who's closest. You know, so I'd be happy to do that if I could get a copy of that list.
Commissioner Murdoch.
Yes, I think it's valuable to have some state context, and having a few of the larger communities in Ohio might be helpful. I know they're on this list, but just to do that. And in addition, if there's a need for any regional context, our organization surveys the communities annually for all positions, so we've got some data that we'd be happy to share with you too.
Great, thank you. And may I comment that I use your data and very much appreciate it. So.
Thank you. I'll relay that back to the folks who do that.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Tyler.
Oh, yes, I was just going to add that in addition to taking those larger cities off, we could probably eliminate some of the smaller ones too.
Are there other factors for us to give consideration to in determining how broad the scope of this list should be?
Director, Chair, I think Greg was getting to this part next, but it might be helpful to know what the questions we would be asking those cities are. Just to give the group a kind of idea of the breadth of the questionnaire that Greg shared with us last week. That was pretty impressive. But just to understand the type of data that we're asking for, and then compare it to the cities that we've got to figure out whether we want to know all of that information from these cities.
That's an excellent thought. Why don't we proceed in that fashion?
I'm not sure, is that
It
a
is,
part of the binder?
yeah, actually,
It is.
it's the next page in the research.
Oh, it is, okay, I don't think I have that one.
Essentially, these are
I have
the
that.
post questions that you put in the salary survey, correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct. The proposed salary survey questions, and this is that difference I was mentioning earlier, is that if most cities don't have a what we call a class spec or a job description, normally what we would do is we would just send that to them and ask, do you have a job that matches this one? And then ask for some basic salary data. Well, we don't have the luxury of that in this case, so we actually need to describe a little bit about the job, but some pretty specific questions about what we would like to know. And you can see here just a couple of the first questions for each, and as you can see, we have this delineated by elected office. So it's council, mayor, city attorney, and city auditor, it would be logical in some cases to ask some of the same questions for each of those, but for others, asking, do you have an elected city council obviously doesn't go with the other elected officials. So you'll find that some of the first few questions are different for each one. And I'd be happy to go through these, or however you'd like to do it, Chairman Christie. But really what it comes down to is, as I said at the beginning of the Commission's meeting today, if there are questions that the Commission would rather stay away from, if there are questions that the Commission would like to add to that, certainly I'm willing to do that. We do want to put in that caveat, though, that the more information we ask for, often the longer it takes to get that information.
Given the fact that the commissioners are looking at these questions, I would believe for the first time, how would you like for us to suggest any alternative questions, or indicate to you questions that we feel are inappropriate, etc.?
Well, be your preference. Are we looking at maybe some kind of communications that's established?
Yeah, that should be a good point. Communication and exchange of information and research isn't just limited to these meetings here. Certainly, we are all ruled by email these days. And we're presenting quite a bit of information today. It may behoove us to take a second to, both on your side, think of plus or minus information that you'd want to take or leave, and from our points, sort of take some of the feedback we've heard. You know, Ms. Easterday referenced looking at the Chamber's list of cities, going back to make sure we include those, maybe winnow down some of the smaller cities, some of the bigger cities, make sure we have the Ohio cities, and we can come back to you with an additional list. Similarly, with these questions, I think these are fairly basic, but if there were questions that you had that you wanted to add, certainly we could, but if there are that you want to subtract, or you don't really think that in the end game you're going to put much weight behind, then we may not have to include it.
Just at first blush, I'm looking at the questions with regard to council members, and there's one that reads, are your council members full-time, and then follows up with saying that if part-time, do they hold other full-time employment outside the elected office? Very legitimate question. I think I'd be interested in understanding if the opportunity for other employment is there, not necessarily whether the current council members hold other positions, but whether the opportunity is there.
It's a very good point, because in our initial research we found that there are actual cities that their charter prohibits outside employment. In fact, our mayor is prohibited from having outside employment. I think the city attorney and auditor as well. And just for a point of reference, our charter does not define the role of council as full-time or part-time. Leave it to you to decide, I guess. But other cities do it differently, and it's a good question to ask.
Mr. Chair, if I may, a couple of thoughts come to mind. The one is if there's any value in us knowing what form of local government they have. We know that some councils are, much weaker than others, so that might be valuable to know. And then there may be value in knowing the frequency in which their council meets with their official meeting. Obviously, there are a lot of meetings involved, but the frequency of their official council meetings might be useful as well.
Both are outstanding. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Sorry, my voice went there. With the questions, one that I'm not sure if it belongs in here or not is there, if there's some sort of regular mechanism to automatically adjust. You mentioned COLA or CPI increase. It might be good to know if there's a mechanism already in place in these cities to adjust it once it's been said. Yeah.
Very good.
So I think based upon the feedback that we heard from you, I think that what we'll do is, with regard to the peer cities, Greg will take your comments that you've had today and send out a revised list, and we'll send that out by email to you. And then the same thing with the questions. There were definitely some good additional questions that maybe we should be asking. We'll send that out to you by email, and then if you could just get back to us maybe in about a week, just make sure that we're asking the right questions and we're we're asking the right cities. That would be great, so that we can start getting information for you to help you with your decision.
The email responses to the amendments or the things that you've just recommended are due back to you by the 19th.
Yes.
I'm sure that's a reasonable time frame for us to comply with. Outstanding. Anything further on either of these two areas, the comparison cities or any of the specific questions to ask? Any questions of the commission members?
Just another thought that might be useful, and I'm mindful of how many questions, but finding out the size of their city budget. Are there any entities like Conference of Mayors or National League of Cities that have provided any research or support for this effort, or could they?
I know that our legislative research team has reached out to the National League of Cities and U.S. Conference of Mayors. I don't know that we've got a response back yet, but we did think of that and are hopeful that perhaps they might help provide some context to the discussion. Of course, timeliness and how recent they've done the study matters. So I think we're pursuing parallel paths and trying to get as much information as possible so that we'll probably cook it down before it gets to you to refine it and make sure it's consistent, but to make sure we're asking as many people as we can who may have already done the work. Don't want to redo MORPC's work. If National League of Cities just completed a comprehensive study, it sure would be nice to have it. So we've asked.
Certainly in the interest of expediency. It makes no sense to do the additional labor that's already been done for you. That's great. Speaking of which, if we have that information back to you by the 19th, what's your sense of the amount of time it would take to do the research, and what reasonable expectations would you have for responses coming back from peer cities, et cetera?
I know you would prefer a better answer than this, but at this point it's hard to say without knowing what that number is. I did a quick count here. Excluding Columbus, there are 41 cities on this long list that you have. Even half of that, even let's round it to 20 cities. It really just depends on the number of questions, and remember, we're asking multiple questions about more than one job. So it's it could be a month. It could be longer, and I wish I had a better answer for you. I'm sorry that I don't. What I always stress in this is that we're really doing two things. Actually, three. There's the salary survey itself. Then there's the collection and analysis of that salary survey, which I have a staff of one, and that's a lot of data to combine. And then after it's been analyzed, there's the presentation of that. There's forming charts and graphs and tables and anything that would help the commission understand it better and at a quicker glance.
And that's before you even get to the other core questions.
Yes, sir. That's correct. So again, I don't mean to be wishy-washy about it, but at this point, it would be difficult to estimate a time without knowing the number of questions and the number of cities to whom we're asking those questions.
Well, part of what we're attempting to accomplish is to streamline that process by narrowing the list a bit. So my understanding is, and please clarify if this is not the course of action we're taking, based on the feedback that you've gotten today and some of the questions asked, we're going to take the first crack at narrowing that list.
Yes, sir.
That information will come back to us for review, and within a week, we will provide information by email that says yay or nay, we agree with the list, any other suggestions that we have. Likewise with editing the questions. So hopefully within a week from today, we'll know the parameters, and that will hopefully then afford you the opportunity to give us a more specific guesstimate
Yes,
on the time frame for this. Some of this may, we may have some of our answers here shortly when we turn to Ken for a kind of an overview of the time frame, because we are obviously working with a fairly narrow window. We're talking about a 3-month period for a recommendation, and that is by provisions of charter. So that may dictate or help us to dictate the scope of the inquiry.
Is it a fair assumption that if any of these cities had conducted some similar research, we would know that because they would have contacted us? Or is that a question worth sending out before we start the surveying ourselves?
Yes, Commissioner. Actually, that's a very good question. When I receive requests for any salary survey, I have a file, a database that I keep those answers in, our responses. One of the benefits of having these relationships with other municipalities is that we share the results of our surveys, and with the Commission's permission, I will certainly offer that to the municipalities who respond. However, the problem with that sometimes, most of the time, is that not all of the same questions are being asked, and so we find ourselves going back to the same city and essentially doing what we would have to do with the other cities, you know, who didn't respond or who weren't part of that survey. So the basic information we would have, but often, you know, if it's a kind of a specific question like we may have here, chances are they wouldn't have asked us the same question. I did actually just complete a salary survey for Detroit's elected officials as recently as 2 weeks ago. But I know just from memory, it's not near as extensive as our questions, so far as they exist.
But at least you would have core salary information for City of Detroit.
Yes, sir. I would say the salary information, that's probably the easiest part.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And since it's public record, in most cases, you can really look that information up on the city's internet sites.
My memory serves me correctly. We do have access to some web-based systems, Connexa maybe being one,
Yes.
that hopefully can be a tool that would help to supply some of the information that you may be utilizing in
Definitely.
responding to the questions. Would that system include many of the cities that are already on this list?
It would include the cities. I would be able to regionalize it, so to speak. The issue might be there is that we're asking about public or elected official jobs, and most of those jobs, while they are, some of them are public sector, which do help us out when we're comparing other jobs. I don't recall seeing a lot of elected official information on those aggregated salary surveys. That's not to say that they're not there, so I'm certainly happy to look. My theory is if we have a resource, let's use it.
Sure.
So I will check there.
Just one last thought before we move on to timeframes. I know that in the process of conducting salary surveys as it relates to bargaining unit positions, there are often concerns about whether or not the municipality that we're working with or obtaining the information from is in a right-to-work state. That's probably not nearly as applicable as it relates to elected officials, but I'm just curious as to your sense of whether or not that's one other factor, one other consideration that still would be one of the things that would be taken into consideration.
That is correct, Chairman Christie. We do have a separate column on a similar peer city or core peer city table where we would know whether that state, the state in which that municipality is located, is a right-to-work state or not. But that is, as you said, really focusing on the bargaining unit jobs. For the Commission's duty in completing this, we actually removed that column for the elected officials. It just didn't seem pertinent to.
I raise it primarily because it sometimes can be an issue, and I suspect that there may be members of the general public that would wonder to what extent any of that would be relevant in this determination. But I think you've already answered the question. You indicated that it typically would not be, given the nature of the positions that we're reviewing.
Yes, sir, but that being said, I can provide a list to the Commission of the, I think it's 34 so-called right-to-work states in the country, and the non-right-to-work states, whatever terminology we want to use, and then we can match that up if that would be useful to the Commission. I'm happy to do that.
Great, thank you. Any of the Commission members have any other questions before we move on to timelines? Okay, great. Thank you. Ken, I think we're segueing back to
You get to listen to me for a little while. I'll make it quick. There's sunshine outside. So I think one of the last items we wanted to try and knock out before we adjourn, and got a number of next steps already outlined, was just to take a look at the calendar. And this just provides context to the last conversation. Perhaps if we would go back in time, maybe we would have given the Citizens Commission on Elected Official Compensation more than 3 months to look at this issue, but perhaps not. I think there's probably some wisdom in putting a condensed time frame around this because, as we've just discussed, you could very easily draw on a lot of different factors, a lot of information, and end up at a spot where you have too much information and you may not really be able to arrive at any better decision than you might have had you started off with a smaller. But we'll work through that, and I think that our goal collectively is to be able to get you the best information we can in the shortest time possible, so you have a good basis to make a decision within the time frame. The time frame set out, essentially the way that it was focused, is trying to get the Commission to a point where within that 3-month time frame you had draft recommendations approved. Whether that was the final report or not is less important. It's really the work of the Commission, and the ultimate decisions is what we were really gearing it by. Essentially, there is no penalty if you went over, except to say that in the charter it says a council can compel you to produce a report. In this case, I don't think that's really an issue, but the 3-month time frame is in the charter for a specific purpose. So we will try and honor that and get to recommendations within that time frame, and in a final tidied up report with all the appendices and references in a short time thereafter. And much of that work can be done as we go along through the process. The recommendations are pretty focused, really. Once you get the information in, there's certainly opportunity for debate and discussion, but really a lot of the work is on the front end. So that may impact the timeline that we put out before you today, which was really a bi-weekly schedule or cadence of meetings. That may or may not be practical right out of the gates, and I guess I'll pose a few questions to the group also along the way. while it's not specifically outlined here, it would probably be in the best interest of all of us, certainly the commission, to contemplate having at least one public hearing where public testimony is accepted. It does not necessarily mean that we're going to welcome a great number of people to speak, but affording the opportunity for people who would like to come down to speak to you in person, I think is important. We could accomplish that in a couple of different ways. I'll draw on our experience from the Charter Review Commission. I think we did 2 public hearings just in the Charter Review Commission process. I think one was in the afternoon in advance of a regularly scheduled meeting, and one was in the evening hours. And I think the rationale behind that is while we all think that it might be easier to get to a community meeting that's held in the evening based on our work schedules, but not everybody works a 9-to-5 job, and with childcare responsibilities and other draws on people's time, sometimes it's actually easier to get away in the middle of the day, to take a lunch hour, to come down and speak. So throw those ideas out there for you. And also drawing from that experience, we had a public hearing or meeting where testimony was solicited in advance of consideration of some of the recommendations that the Charter Review Commission ultimately arrived on, and after they were more crystallized. They weren't final yet, I don't believe, but they were near final. To be able to get some guidance before you start hearing the information, and after some of that's been out in the public domain and has been debated a bit. So you might want to consider too. The timing of those could be in off weeks of meetings in between, or we could coordinate them with the commission meetings. So I'd throw those out there for considerations. Certainly, if we believe that Greg and council research staff may need more time to get some of that hard data in, that next meeting could be pushed back, or we could have a public hearing where we solicit testimony. Or perhaps, based on what the commission might like to see in terms of what we discuss at these meetings, we could use that meeting number 2 that's on this outline for other purposes than considering data, or perhaps it's an update on what data we have to that point, but we all, I think, from the last discussion, understand we may not have everything we need to start making any judgments or comparisons. I throw that out there because I think in making this outline, it was really heavily dependent on getting that data in the door. That said, perhaps another action item might be, and with that first week time frame, would be to take a look at some of the examples of studies that have been done by other communities and think about this. And based on some of the questions, Ms. Lee, that you asked about how frequently do you meet, the sort of the nature of their jobs. Other communities have actually brought in elected officials to interview them, so to speak, or to discuss what is the nature of the job. I don't know if that's something that we want to do. Had not been originally contemplated in my mind, but there are other considerations that we could take into account if we didn't feel like we would have enough data in the door based on that meeting that's on the books, or we could simply just push that back. A lot of it is dependent on the feedback from the commission. I was trying to be a bit respectful of your time and your other obligations and give a little bit of breathing room between meetings. But if that's not possible, or you don't think that's really truly the best use of your time, maybe we simply compress the schedule a little bit, and rather having multiple one-week breaks in between meetings, perhaps we have meetings in back-to-back weeks. Maybe we'd start on easy questions and then work towards the harder ones. I've blocked out sort of the end of the week, of those weeks, and perhaps trying to go through the exercise of each day of each week for the next 2 months in this context is not going to be a productive use of any of our times. However, if there are days of the weeks that you can say are never going to be good, that you would really prefer not to meet on, whether that be a Wednesday or a Friday, or hopefully it's not all the days that are trouble for each of us, that would be good to know. The time of the day, whether afternoon is preferable, sort of towards the end of the day. Some folks like to be able to work through the day and know that when they leave the office at 3 and they're committing themselves to this, that's the rest of their day. Others want to do the morning.
Let's pick that apart just a little
Sure.
bit. You've placed a number of suggested topics for the next meeting, assuming that it happens the week of the 22nd. I think all of them make sense, but I think it's important that we hear from the other commission members in terms of what you think would be an appropriate use of time, assuming that, I think, legitimately, I think all the data will not be in by the week of the 22nd. I heard, for one thing, let's review or provide an update of what has been received today. There's the possibility of utilizing that week or a day of that week for public hearing. And there may be an opportunity to utilize that time to review the work of other similar commissions. So if any of those three or any other thoughts you might have are appropriate or need to be something we should consider, I'd love to hear from the other commissioners.
Mr. Chair, just a thought about, or a question about the public hearing. Is the intent to have ideas brought to us in a public hearing, or for the public hearing to react to the direction that we're headed? Because that would affect where it would fall on the timeline.
Absolutely. If that were the case, it seems it would be a bit premature to have something like that in the week of the 22nd. But Ken, if you can clarify, please.
Yeah, I think that if you could decide if you wanted to do one or two. Certainly, if you were only going to do one, since we have a very condensed time frame and it's difficult, I would probably recommend having that hearing later in the process when things have been discussed more fully. If you were contemplating having two or more than one, there may be benefit to have one on the front end and one on the back end, in which case it might not be too early to have one in the week of the 23rd. Essentially, you're opening the door to whatever it is that anyone would want to offer without any pretense, but simply stating and publicizing that all of you will be here or probably in council chambers to receive anyone who has an opinion or wants to give input. And there's other means we'll be getting that input, but certainly there's value seen in having that kind of open meeting. So that's really dependent on whether or not you wanted to do one or more than one.
Essentially, there would be no scope, or there would be no parameters to the testimony. Essentially,
No.
it would be whatever the...
Yeah, what we did with the Charter Review Commission is simply use the rules of council for public speaking. So folks had 3 minutes to speak. They signed up and filled out a slip, and we called them one by one. And it actually led to some very good discussion. Relatively few number of people, but a good discussion on some important issues. And you can't discount what might be brought to fore from the public.
Given that, it seems to me that may be of more value on the front end because it may help to shape the scope of some of what we review and what's contained in the recommendations. Obviously, we're bound by what the charter indicates we should be doing, but I'd hate to be in a position where we've done a significant amount of work and we are 2 months into the process. We have a public hearing and we hear a recommendation or recommended course of action that makes great sense, but it would take us another month essentially to complete. So that's my initial reaction to that thought.
What I found additionally useful through the Charter Review Commission process was the establishment of the email address. So at any time, people could submit comments and thoughts, and those were read aloud at the beginning of each meeting. And so that could also be a vehicle for public comment early on in the process. And then when we get to a point of a public hearing, we could have people reacting to recommendations. So that could be another consideration for us.
Just for the benefit of the group, it was one of those final items I was going to point out. We will have a dedicated email address again, in addition to an email or web form. So be able to submit input either via the website or simply shoot an email via the dedicated website that will be live probably within the next week, certainly, and populated with the information that you see here.
And it was the practice of the Charter Commission to review that information taken from the website at the beginning of each meeting?
Yes, the city clerk would read if there were any emails that had been received, and we had copies of those, so it was still a very transparent process if we had received submissions from members of the public.
Excellent, thank you.
Can you also remind me what the public notice period is for these meetings? How far in advance do we have to let people know?
Sure. So there's the legal the response, which even is a little bit gray, but we are required to, and the method, and the clerk could certainly speak to it too, and correct me if I'm wrong, at a minimum publicizing it in the city bulletin, which is the official means of publicizing city meetings, all those things, zonings, various things that are required of us to notice, and those go out on Saturday. At a minimum, we would do one posting in the city bulletin. If possible, we'll do two. What happens in practice, if we are able to identify a schedule from once we bat this around and come to some conclusions within the next week probably, if we have a schedule of all those meetings, we will put that in a notice for the entire schedule. We do that for our budget process, for example. So if we know we're going to be meeting, the second week of February, we don't wait until the week prior to let people know. We publicize the full schedule. We would still notice it in advance in the bulletin. In addition, where most people end up finding out about things these days, and they don't go to the city bulletin quite as often as they might have in the past, when the city bulletin was contemplated as a means of communicating this, our communications team will send out advisories, usually one at least a week in advance, and then generally a day or two before, depending on the timing of the meetings and what's practical. But that goes out to all the media outlets and several thousand various different folks who have opted in to receive information from the city. It's on our website. It's out there, and those that would be paying attention in the media certainly will have that information well in advance of the meetings to help publicize it.
So the reason for the question is, as we're thinking about this potential meeting on the 25th, 26th, or 27th, conceivably we could, a week from now, make that determination based on whether we think there's information for us to consider or to begin to review at that meeting.
Certainly, we
based on
could,
staff
we
recommendation.
could probably send out an advisory the day that we make that decision. If it were later in the week next week, have it in the bulletin on the 21st, and probably do another blast on the 24th, assuming it was the second half of that week.
So that could be an option, Mr. Chair. So if we don't know today whether or not we have enough content for a meeting in 2 weeks.
Makes great sense. And to your point, we will know, hopefully in a week, the amount of content we're likely to have at our disposal by the week of the 22nd.
I'll make sure you do.
Okay, sounds great. And at that point, we can determine to what extent a public hearing would be the better course of action. Now, one other quick clarification question. Does the entire meeting have to be dedicated to public?
No, if memory serves me, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe at least one of our meetings we had a sort of working meeting like this, which is still open to the public and always was and will be. But there was a break then where I think we left this room and went to council chambers. One, it broke up the day a little bit and gave you a chance to stretch your legs, but it also gave folks an extra half hour after work, conceivably, to be able to get down to City Hall. Started at 5:30, which traditionally is the time when most council hearings start. And then we left the rolls open, so to speak, until 6. We kept the speaker slips open so that if someone was a little bit late, weren't sure if we were going to start on time or how many people might be signed up, if they got here at 6:45 or 5:45 or 5:50, they would still have been able to submit a slip and speak at that meeting. So certainly we could have a meeting like this in this setting and move next door to chambers.
We may be able, for example, to devote an hour
Sure.
to work and then proceed to council chambers for the other half.
Exactly.
And then that meeting would be dictated by the number of speakers multiplied by 3 minutes.
Exactly. And I think that there was a public hearing that may have only been a few minutes, and there was at least one that went longer because we had a good exchange of information.
Well, depending on the amount of data we have, we may very well be restricted to an hour, if that. And it may make sense to at least think about a dual meeting, one which allows us to do some work and yet still affords an opportunity for the general public to provide input, assuming that that could work for the commission members. Any objection to that approach? Okay, fair enough. Hopefully we'll know in another week specifically what and for what duration we'll be able to accomplish a week of the 22nd. Is there a day out of the 3 that are highlighted here that works best for commission members, the 25th, 26th, or 27th, assuming we go forward?
You want us to check now?
Mr.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
It's okay.
I was just going to say permission to pull out the iPhone.
Oh, absolutely. Okay. You see everyone reaching for the pockets. We have a pretty good idea what's going on with that.
And Chair, just for a point of clarification,
Yes.
so you had originally said, I thought, that March 19th we would try to have the comparable cities narrowed down as well as the questions narrowed down?
The idea is to provide feedback to Mr. Beavis and other staff that may be working on this as to the scope of their review, the amount of data that they're getting. So essentially, yes, we would provide whatever feedback as to the total number of cities and whether we had any additional questions, any additional recommendations for the questions to be asked, or whether we were going to narrow those questions, et cetera, and have that information back to you by the 19th.
Yes, sir. And Mr. Chairman, if I may, I was also going to provide to the commission a winnowed down list of cities, if you will, for your consideration.
It's that list that we're expecting the commission members to respond to you by the 19th.
Okay.
That's my understanding. We haven't muddied this up.
And you don't even have to wait till the 19th.
Right.
But
Well,
certainly want to be respectful and give you the time to review
Sure.
it. There's a lot of things going on.
and I guess we'll trigger that as
Sooner is good.
understanding when we're likely to have that list.
I would say as soon as possible. The work that I do for this commission will be the highest priority. So I would, I don't think that will be extraordinarily time consuming. I would say within the next couple of business days, if not tomorrow.
Very good. And I think that'll still afford us ample time to respond. It'll give us 2 or 3 days at least to review the list and get information back to you by the 19th.
I would just, kind of thinking out loud, I think there are 2 key points of times when our citizens might want to interject, kind of like you were referring to, at the front end, because it seems like this is really going to guide pretty much most of our work. And so if anyone has any input they want on the questions or the comparable cities, that getting that information from our citizens up front would be really important, as well as then on our draft recommendations. So I'm not sure what we could gain from them in the meantime besides, ways to think about it, but I would say that this would be a key time to gain any input from residents. So if there's no other way, then we should really try to, if we're not going to have a hearing within that time frame before we set those questions in our comparable cities, then I would say that we'd really want to get the word out to residents to submit things online at the very least. Just thinking out loud.
Certainly no concern per se about that approach. My only fear is, given the scope of the time frame we're working with, I think we have to be cognizant of the scope of the questions, and we've got to be fair to those who are gathering the data and give them reasonable parameters within which to work. And I think we have to rely on Mr. Beaverson and others to tell us what realistically they can do. And I just want to make sure that although we get information from the general public, that it's the kind of information that truly can be obtained. Any recommendations coming from the public certainly is welcome. I just want to make sure that the scope of that is something that's reasonable and that we can obtain within the timeframes that are given. So no problem with opening things up. I just want to make sure that it's understood that we're bound by certain specific parameters. And while we take all of that into consideration, everything but the kitchen sink may not necessarily be something that we can take into consideration.
To both of your points, though, I think on the city staff side, we can make sure we get our website live as quickly as possible, the web form up, the email live, and work with our communications team to be able to put something out certainly next week. One, to remind people that you're meeting, and two, to let them know that the resource exists. There's no use in going through the work of developing the resource and having it available if no one knows about it. And we can get that done. And ultimately, to your point, depending on what comes back, we can make judgments about how practical it is and whether or not it needs to go back into the field, or it's simply the type of public comment that is more how someone feels about the situation and that they want to make sure that they're heard, and give them the opportunity to speak.
Okay.
Can we also potentially follow up in an email to the commission as to whether or not that they prefer to do a public meeting, early in the process here? Maybe it is that week of the 26th, maybe it's the next week. Is that something that would be helpful for the commission to ask that question, so that maybe we don't have to answer that question now, but
yeah, give you boxes to check
Absolutely.
yes or no.
Again, the simple answer to the question is absolutely. But a lot of that decision will be driven by how much information we have coming back. So that's that.
So it was good or bad days that week of the 22nd, I think.
27th is the best for me.
Okay.
Before 5, I have an evening commitment.
Okay.
I can eke out a little bit of time on Wednesday and Thursday, but Friday gives me the most flexibility.
Okay.
Ditto here.
Ditto. I'm pretty flexible.
Mine would have to be after 3 on that Friday to make it easy.
Okay.
I could do that, yeah.
I'm not
But
my
before
best
5,
self after
yeah.
3. I'm just
Sorry.
Thank you.
for making these big decisions that might not be.
Thank you, Commissioner.
I'm just telling you that I can offer my best self. And
Understood.
It's not Friday afternoon.
We're being
Well,
transparent here. I hear you.
again,
I mean,
I'm going to play devil's advocate for 1 second, just as we may have to come back to this. If we were to combine a working meeting with a meeting for public testimony, probably doing it in the later hours on Friday may not be the best option. It may actually be very convenient for some people on a Friday night. My life's not that exciting, but for others, they may raise an eyebrow that choosing that time wouldn't be the most convenient time for somebody who would want to weigh in. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's a good or a bad time to have the meeting, but just to take that into consideration for purposes of a public hearing.
The alternative for me would be on the 25th, because the 26th is just not a
Okay.
realistic date for me at all.
Dawn and Kristen, how your calendars look on the 25th?
The afternoon is good.
Okay.
I can do late afternoon after 3:30.
Okay.
We'll make it work.
I prefer morning, but I believe that I can make the afternoon work.
Okay. Maybe we'll, as a staff, put together some options. I suppose if the 27th still remains to be the best day, if you wanted to do an afternoon hearing, because the commission, I think that the previous Charter Review Commission, I believe, did one in the work day and one in the evening. A Friday afternoon isn't necessarily bad if you're trying to get that crowd. But we'll present you a few options of timing and see what works for you. Yeah.
We want her best self.
That's right. That's right.
About my schedule, I do think that a Friday afternoon public hearing will
Yeah.
not be
I agree.
well
I agree.
attended. Yeah.
Fair
And
enough.
we'll get criticized for that.
Fair enough.
So
I
the
think we-
option is, if we're looking at a Friday at all, it would be best to make that a work day.
Yeah.
A working meeting similar to
Yeah.
this one. And it may be somewhat limited in duration, but we'll see.
Okay.
I think the only other thing that I would recommend at this point is that we take a little time to look at the two commission reports that were provided. I know that it'll be of great value to me, just to look at the scope of the report and some of their recommendations, how they arrived at them. These aren't necessarily templates for what it is that we intend to accomplish, but I do think at least it provides us some background and a sense of where similarly commissioned persons were, basically where they've landed and what recommendations they've made. So.
I would say the ones that were provided tended to be on the more comprehensive end. Weren't working to give you reports that were more concise, but ours may end up being, we gave you examples for the express purpose of providing food for thought.
Very good. Sounds good. Any additional presentations, any other information that we need to digest today? Or any other questions from any of the commission members? Silence sounds like a motion to adjourn. There being no further questions and no additional business that we need to address for the day, I believe we are adjourned. Thanks everyone for your time and efforts today, and look forward to working with the city's experts and benefiting from all of your input as we go forward.
Thank you.